don't have to photograph me either. He was number 5 of 6 children of Vincent and Elizabeth. No, what was her name?
Mary.
Mary. Vincent and Mary Hirsch. My father was born in 1896, and he was the next to the last child and the next to the last boy. But the family legend, as I have heard it, is that they were on a dairy farm and everybody had to work on the farm and make hay and milk the cows and do all of that stuff. But he would disappear, and if they didn't find him anywhere, they'd look up in the haymow, and there he would be up there reading a book. He always liked to read, and he wanted to go to college, and there was just absolutely no possibility of him going to college in the situation they had on the farm. So he applied to West Point and to Annapolis as his only opportunities to get a college education. And he was accepted. There was some kind of competitive examination he took, I think. I don't know, but that's the way they do it nowadays. He was accepted by both West Point and Annapolis. Since he'd never seen the water, he chose West Point. So he entered West Point in 1914, and he was graduated early. He was class of 1918, but he was graduated early because of World War I. And by the time a couple of years after graduation, he was a captain of artillery in France.
So he saw action in World War I and II.
Yeah, yes he did. And Pat, my cousin Pat, your uncle, I guess, brought some letters right here yesterday of his, written to his family in Medford, talking about gun emplacements and trying to get the big guns across a field rather than by road, and how hard it was, and how the Germans were shelling close by and getting closer, and the shells were getting closer, and I just read that for the first time day before yesterday.
I think they're going to get those letters scanned so we can share those.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So Nancy, having heard the story of your father, now if you could tell us more about your love for sailing. How did that happen?
Well, we were living in Hawaii. I was going to the University of Hawaii, and I got a student job as a lab helper. I hesitate to call it a technician, although maybe I was a lab technician, for a marine biology laboratory, which was located on a little island in the middle of Kaneohe Bay, which is on the other side of Oahu Island from Honolulu. So we would go back and forth to work by boat. They had a heavy skiff, with a little spray shield on it that took the workers back and forth to work. But there were graduate students there doing research work as well, and one of the graduate students had a production boat called a Thistle, which was a competition boat. And there were Thistle clubs, and they raced these identical boats against each other, and it was a sport boat. But the Thistle boat, I imagine it was a Scottish design. How could it be otherwise? I don't know. But it was about 14 feet long. It was a two-man boat. And this guy, whose name was Phil Helfrich, took the girls out for a sail one lunch hour. And there was the telephone operator girl, and there was my boss, who was a Chinese woman, Winifred Seu, and there was me, and there may have been one other, but we all got in this boat. There probably wasn't one other, because there would have been, anyway. So we got in this boat for a sail. It was a beautiful afternoon, and wind was great, and I happened to get in the boat last, and I was sitting next to the tiller, opposite from Phil Helfrich, and he said, "Oh, you want to steer?" I said, "Yeah." So I steered the boat, and it was just wonderful. It was just almost like flying, or only, it was freedom. It was free, and it was in harmony with all of nature, right? The wind is blowing, and you're capturing the wind, and you're going to where you deliberately point the boat to, and it was just magic. And I just thought, wow, this is really wonderful. I want to do more of this. I was 23 years old. It was the first time I'd ever been in a sailboat. So I started going to the yacht club in Honolulu, the Hawaii Yacht Club, and offering, meeting people, and they had a racing schedule, where they would race these boats, and there were lots of overseas boats with overseas ocean-going capabilities in Honolulu. Not lots, but more than you would expect in a marina. I don't know, maybe not. Anyway, there were overseas boats of overseas capacity there, and we used to race every now and then. And I ended up being crew on a boat called the Laga, which was a heavily built, double-ended Swedish design boat owned by an old guy who was a retired ship's radio operator. And he had lots of girls in his crew. It would take, for a race, it would take at least 4 people to really get the most out of the boat. Changing sails and all this kind of stuff. But this guy, his name was Sparky, because he was a radio operator. He didn't make passes at the girls. He was an old guy, and he liked, I guess, the company of girls. But anyway, all the guys that had other boats that were looking for crew, they hated him because all the good girls sailed with him, because he let us sail. He actually let us, operate the boat and stuff, rather than making sandwiches and opening cans of beer and all this kind of stuff. So that's how I learned sailing, and he was an experienced seaman, and he had a boat built to perform in the ocean, not in protected waters, but in the ocean, where you have to take whatever comes and get through it. And a couple of years later, I was spending the night in the harbor after a party. I didn't want to drive home after the party. I slept in the cockpit of a boat of a good friend of mine. Woke up early the next morning, and here was this beautiful boat tacking into the harbor against the wind. And none of the sailboats I knew and had seen could tack in that narrow channel. And here was this big boat, 52 feet long. It was bigger than all the rest of the boats around. They were all about 35 feet, or 30 feet, and a big boat was at 40 feet. Here's this big 52-foot boat tacking in with a reefed mainsail and a staysail up. Just a little bit of sail up so that they didn't drive with the wind, they were just under control and nice and cool and perfect control, and able to sail and make to weather against the trade winds blowing. And they came in and rounded up and tied up at the end of the same pier that where I was.
With no engine.
With no engine.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really unprecedented in my experience. And so it was Sunday morning, and we were going to have Sunday breakfast. And I knew it was a boat from afar, you know. And in those days, nobody had refrigeration, and he wouldn't have had even an ice chest on the boat because he wouldn't have had access to ice, you know. And so what you do is you go over and say, hey, come have breakfast with us. You know, we have cold milk, and we have fresh bread, and we have eggs, you know, and all these things that he wouldn't have had. So that's how I met him. He had breakfast with us on my friend's boat, and then my friends say, yeah, you know, Nancy met Bob, and she married his boat.
So that was the guy you married?
That was the guy I married, Bob Griffith, yeah.
Really? How did he get into that business?
He had always loved sailing. He grew up with, his father always had a fishing boat. But he always, you know, in his youth, he helped unload the Alaska, I have to think the name of the lines. There were still square rig sailing ships sailing into San Francisco Bay. He was from the San Francisco area. And he would go down and get casual work helping to unload these boats. And of course they unloaded by hand, and they had to, what was it? It was the Star line. There was the Star of India, the Star of Finland. There were 3 or 4 boats that belonged to that line that were trading between the Pacific North. I have the idea they came down from Alaska and unloaded in San Francisco, but I could be wrong. The Star of India, which he worked on in 1939, or not on, but unloading on the wharf, is now a museum ship in San Diego. And it's in such good condition that the society that takes care of it decided, you know, they wanted to sail this thing. And I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, they got all the Sea Scouts in the U.S., each unit, to make a sail. And they got new sails that way for the whole ship. And they practiced, and they actually took the ship out and sailed it, this historic old.
That was a square rigger.
That's a square rigger. The Star of India. It's today in San Diego.
Now, when you got married, you were how old? 23?
25.
25. So you dated for 2 years.
Yeah, we went sailing together. I went on board the boat, but we didn't marry right away. But
so when you got married, did you think you were going to be on land most of your life, or on the water?
No. We married because we both loved sailing, and we wanted that life.
You knew that would be your life.
And yeah. Okay. And Bob wanted to see the world. He wanted to go everywhere. You know, he was interested in everything, and he wanted to sail the world. And it's beautiful life. You know, you have a place to prepare food and a place to sleep. You know, you have your little home with you, and you can go anywhere that has water up in front of it.
Well, they married the right girl.
He did. I mean, we really were
Soulmates.
We were soulmates, and we sailed longer and farther and harder than anybody we knew, you know.
So you went around the world how many times?
3 times.
And when was a shipwreck? Was that the first time around?
After the first time around. We went from Honolulu west about to through the Pacific Islands and New Zealand, Australia, the Indian Ocean, and up the Red Sea, and through the Med, and across the Atlantic, and through the Panama Canal, and back to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we were leaving on that's when my father was sick. And so we wanted to go to Pitcairn Island, which has was the island that the mutineers from the mutiny on the Bounty, it's the island that they and their descendants live on to this day. And they've lived a maritime life. There's no airport or anything there. In fact, the British wanted to give them a tractor so they could make a road down the cliff to the landing, so it would be easier to get cargo back up to their village, which was out of sight from the ocean, deliberately, because when they established themselves there, they didn't want any ships to know that island was inhabited. And in order to get this tractor to them, they had to drop it out of a cargo plane. And the plane had to drop it because it didn't have enough fuel to carry it in case there was unfavorable conditions. They didn't have enough fuel to carry it back to Tahiti, where they had loaded it up. And the tractor had to be able to be driven immediately. It had to have charged up batteries, it had to have fuel in it, and just be ready to go. And they had to just they parachuted it down onto this flat area at the top of the island, and then it landed on its upright, and they unhooked the parachutes and they got in and drove it away. So it was an isolated island. We wanted to go there, and then we wanted to go south and around the Horn. But we shipwrecked before we got there.